The rain in Iron Ridge didn't wash things clean. It just turned the dust into a thick, clinging paste that weighed down boots and swallowed hope. It was a town built on the promise of silver and sustained by the reality of mud. Elias Thorne lay prone on the muddy ridge overlooking the alley behind the saloon. The position was terrible, wet, and cold, but it offered the one thing Elias valued above comfort: perspective. Through the brass scope of his Sharps rifle, the world was reduced to a circle of magnified gray. The crosshairs floated, steady as a heartbeat, over the scene playing out 50 yards away. A woman. Small frame, dark hair plastered to her skull by the downpour. Clara Reed. A man. Large, swaying with the momentum of cheap whiskey and expensive entitlement. Barlon. The muscle for the man who owned this town. Elias didn't blink. He controlled his breathing. Inhale. Hold. In the circle of glass, Barlon shoved the woman. She hit the wooden wall of the dry goods store hard enough to shake the loose boards. She didn't scream. That was the first thing Elias noted about her. Most people screamed. Clara Reed just curled inward, protecting her ribs, her face set in a grimace that looked less like fear and more like exhaustion. "Where is he?" Barlon's voice was muffled by the rain, but Elias could read the violence in the man's body language. "The judge wants answers." "Clara. You can't hide a ghost forever." Clara said something back. Elias couldn't hear it, but he saw the defiance in the set of her jaw. She spat at Barlon's boots. Barlon drew a knife. It was a bowie, heavy and dull, a tool for butchery, not surgery. He grabbed Clara by the hair, yanking her head back, exposing the pale line of her throat to the weeping sky. Elias adjusted his aim. 2 clicks to the left to account for the wind coming off the mountains. He wasn't here to save her. Heroes saved people. Elias was a cleaner. A ghost sent by the army to bury a scandal that refused to die. Clara Reed was a loose end. A lead. A variable in an equation that needed to be balanced to zero. If she died here, in this alley, his lead went cold. If she died, he would never find James Reed. And if he didn't find James Reed, Elias would never be free. The crosshair settled on the space just above Barlon's ear. "Don't kill him," Elias whispered to himself, the words lost in the thunder. "Just discourage him." He lowered the barrel a fraction of an inch. He squeezed the trigger. The boom of the Sharps rifle was louder than the thunder. It tore through the valley, a crack of man-made lightning. Down in the alley, Barlon's hat disintegrated. The heavy felt Stetson flew off his head as if yanked by an invisible wire. A line of red appeared instantly on the top of his ear. A graze so precise it was surgical. Barlon froze. He dropped the knife. He looked up at the ridge, eyes wide, searching the darkness. He saw nothing but rain and shadow. Panic, primal and immediate, seized him. He scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, and ran. He ran like a man who had just felt the breath of the reaper on his neck. Clara didn't run. Through the scope, Elias watched her. She slid down the wall until she hit the mud. She stayed there for a long time, her chest heaving. She touched her throat where the knife had been. Then, she looked up. Not with gratitude. She looked up at the ridge with a terrifying intensity. She knew someone was there. Elias pulled back from the scope. He didn't stand up. He didn't wave. He simply rolled onto his back, letting the rain wash over his face, staring up at the charcoal clouds. His hands were shaking. They always shook when he wasn't holding the rifle. The tremors were the only thing the war had left him, besides the nightmares. He lit a cigarette, shielding the match with his cupped hands. The smoke tasted bitter. 1. He counted softly. The game had begun. The next morning, the sun failed to break through the overcast sky, leaving Iron Ridge bathed in a perpetual, bruised twilight. Elias walked into town leading his horse, a roan mare as scarred and road-weary as he was. He wore a long duster coat stained with the clay of 3 territories. And his hat was pulled low. He didn't look like a soldier anymore. He looked like a drifter, a man of no consequence. That was the point. He found Clara Reed at the communal well. She was hauling a bucket of water, the rope groaning against the pulley. She wore a dress that had once been blue but was now the color of dust, patched at the elbows and hem. Her hands, wrapping around the rough hemp rope, were raw and red. Elias tied his horse to a post and approached. He moved with a limp, a souvenir from a skirmish near the border, but his steps were silent. "Heavy load for one person," he said. His voice was gravel, unused to casual conversation. Clara froze. She didn't turn immediately. She finished pulling the bucket onto the lip of the stone well. Then she spun around, her hand instinctively going to the small of her back, as if reaching for a weapon she didn't have. "I can manage," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of warmth. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and deeply suspicious. "I don't need help, I saw that," Elias said. He leaned against a support post, trying to look harmless. It was a difficult performance for him. "Saw you in the alley last night. You held your ground well." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You were watching, I was passing through. Heard the shot. Saw the man run. If you saw, why didn't you step in? Looked like the bullet did the work for me." Clara studied him. She was analyzing him, dismantling him piece by piece. She looked at his boots, military issue, old, his hands calloused, trembling slightly, and the way he stood, weight on his left leg. "Who are you?" she asked. "Elias. Elias Thorne." He took a breath. This was the lie. The hook. "I'm looking for James." The reaction was microscopic, but Elias saw it. A tightening of the corner of her eye. A slight arrest of her breath. "James Reed," Elias continued. "We served together. 5th Cavalry. Before everything happened. I heard he might be back this way. I owe him money. A debt from a poker game 3 years ago. It was a good lie. Simple. Plausible. It offered money, which she clearly needed." Clara laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. She picked up her bucket, the water sloshing over the rim onto her boots. "You're a liar, Mr. Thorne," she said. Elias didn't blink. "Why would I lie about owing a man money? Because James didn't play poker," Clara said, stepping closer to him, her height diminished by his but her presence towering. "And more importantly, James didn't have friends. He had officers he obeyed, and men he commanded. But he didn't have friends who would ride all the way to hell's waiting room to pay back a debt." She turned to walk away. "He's in trouble, Clara," Elias called after her. He dropped the pretense of the debt. He shifted to the secondary lie. "Real trouble. The army isn't done looking. If I found you, others will too. Maybe I can help." Clara stopped. She didn't turn back. Her shoulders were rigid. "My husband is dead," she said. The words were flat, rehearsed. "He died 2 years ago. There is no James Reed. There is no money. There is only me, and my children, and the mud. So get on your horse and ride, Mr. Thorne. There's nothing for you here." She walked away, struggling under the weight of the water, a solitary figure against the gray buildings. Elias watched her go. He reached into his pocket and touched the cold metal of a telegraph communiqué, crumpled into a ball. Target, James Reed. Status, deserter. Theft of payroll. Priority, silence. "She's lying," Elias whispered. He could smell the lie on her. It smelled like fear. He needed a vantage point. The boarding house stood at the end of the main street, a 2-story structure that leaned slightly to the west, as if tired of standing upright. It was run by a woman named Margaret. Margaret was a woman carved from granite and dressed in velvet. She sat on the porch in a rocking chair, a shotgun across her lap and a bottle of gin on the table beside her. She watched Elias approach with the boredom of a woman who had seen every kind of trouble a man could bring. "Room?" Elias asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. $2 a week. Meals are extra. No women in the room. No shooting indoors unless it's strictly necessary," Margaret said, her voice raspy from smoke and spirits. "I'll take the room facing the east," Elias said. Margaret stopped rocking. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. The east room is drafty. Roof leaks when the wind blows hard. I like the view, Elias said. Margaret followed his gaze. The east room looked directly over the empty lot and the cluster of shacks near the creek. It looked directly at Clara Reed's home. Margaret took a sip of gin. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're another one, aren't you? Another what? Another vulture circling the widow. You're not the first, Cowboy. Judge Blackwood has been circling that house for 2 years. Baron circles it like a rabid dog. And now you. She stood up, her joints popping. $2.50. Since you want the view so bad, Elias paid her. He walked up the creaking stairs, the wood groaning under his weight. The room was small. A bed, a wash basin, a chair, and a window. That was all he needed. He threw his saddlebags on the bed and walked to the window. From here, he could see everything. He saw the shack. It was a pathetic structure, patchworked with mismatched lumber and tin sheets. Smoke curled lazily from a crooked chimney. He saw the yard. It was swept clean, meticulous in its poverty. And he saw the boy, Leo. The boy was sitting on a stump near the woodpile. He looked to be about 8 years old. Thin, dark hair like his mother. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural for a child. In his hands he held a block of wood and a small, dull knife. He was carving something. Elias took out his binoculars. The boy's face was blank. Focused. He didn't look up when a dog barked nearby. He didn't look up when a wagon rattled past on the road. He was locked in his own world. Clara came out of the shack. She touched the boy's shoulder. She moved her hands, gestures, signs. Come inside. Eat. The boy looked up. He didn't speak. He simply nodded, gathered his wood shavings, and followed her inside. The mute, Elias murmured. The dossier had mentioned a child. Son, Leo Reed. Age 8. Condition, nonverbal. Elias sat on the hard wooden chair by the window. He took out his sidearm, a Colt Navy revolver. He began to disassemble it, the familiar click-clack of metal parts calming his nerves. He closed his eyes, and the memory hit him like a physical blow. Flashback. The tent was hot. The colonel was sweating. Flies buzzed around a plate of rotting fruit. It's not about the money, Sergeant Thorne, the colonel had said, swirling his brandy. The money is incidental. $30,000 in gold payroll. Yes, we want it back. But James Reed took something else. He took a ledger. Notes. Names. Elias stood at attention, his uniform still crisp back then. Reed is a traitor. The colonel continued. He abandoned his post during the massacre at White River. He ran. And he stole from the United States Army. If he speaks, if he tells his lies to the press or the politicians in Washington, it will tarnish the reputation of brave men. The colonel stood up, leaning close. His breath smelled of onions and sherry. Find him, Elias. You are my best scout. My best ghost. Find him. Secure the ledger. And then, make sure he never speaks again. And anyone who helps him? Anyone who harbors a traitor is a traitor themselves. No loose ends. Clean slate. Elias had nodded. Yes, sir. And flashback. Elias snapped the cylinder back into the revolver. He spun it. The sound was a purr of deadly machinery. He wasn't here to help Clara Reed. He wasn't here to pay a debt. He was here to burn her life down to the ground if that's what it took to flush her husband out of hiding. He looked out the window again. The light was fading. In the shack across the way, a lantern flickered to life. He saw Clara's silhouette moving. She was brushing the boy's hair. It was a tender, intimate moment framed by the rough wood of the window. Elias felt a twinge in his chest. A phantom pain. He ignored it. Don't make me hurt you. Clara, he whispered to the glass. Days bled into a week. The routine was set. Elias watched. He learned their rhythms. Clara woke before dawn. She chopped wood. She cooked. She washed clothes for the miners in town, her hands constantly wet and raw, Leo never spoke. Not once. He existed in a bubble of silence. He shadowed his mother, helpful but distant. When he wasn't working, he was carving. He made birds. Wolves. Bears. Tiny, intricate totems of a wilder world. Elias made his presence known, but only barely. He would sit on the porch of the boarding house, cleaning his rifle, watching as Clara walked past. He tipped his hat. She ignored him. It was a dance of attrition, but the town of Iron Ridge had other dancers. On the 7th day, a carriage arrived. It was black, polished, and pulled by 2 white stallions that looked too clean for this mud. It stopped in front of Clara's shack. Elias was at his window instantly. He grabbed his binoculars. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a black frock coat, leaning heavily on a cane topped with a silver dragon's head. He had a face like a hawk, sharp, predatory, and handsome in an aging, cruel way. Judge Cyrus Blackwood. Elias knew the face. Blackwood was the law in Iron Ridge. He owned the mine, the land, and the sheriff. Elias watched as Blackwood walked to the door of the shack. He didn't knock. He simply opened it and walked in. Elias cursed. He grabbed his hat and his coat. He didn't run. Running drew attention, but he walked with a stride that ate up the distance. He reached the shack just as voices began to rise inside. The walls were thin. Patience has limits, Clara. Blackwood's voice was smooth. A cello played in a tomb. The foreclosure notice was clear. This land belongs to the mining consortium now. My consortium, this land is mine. Clara's voice was shaking but loud. James bought it. I have the deed. You have a piece of paper signed by a traitor and a deserter, Blackwood said. Under the Forfeiture Act, the property of a felon can be seized to pay his debts. And your husband owed the town a great deal. He owed nothing. There was the sound of movement. A crash. A chair falling. You are a stubborn woman, Blackwood said, his voice dropping an octave. I have tried to be generous. I offered to buy the land. I offered you a position in my household. A way to work off the debt. You refused. I would rather starve than work for you. Then perhaps you should consider your son. The orphanage in Helena is a cold place, Clara. They don't take kindly to the children of mutes and traitors. Don't you dare touch him. I can do whatever the law allows. And I am the law. Elias kicked the door open. The wood splintered near the latch. Sunlight flooded the dim interior of the shack. Blackwood spun around, his hand going to the cane as if it were a weapon. Barlon, who had been standing in the corner, reached for his gun. Clara stood in the center of the room, clutching Leo to her side. Leo's face was buried in her skirts, his body trembling. Elias stood in the doorway, blocking the light. He didn't draw his gun. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, radiating a calm, focused menace. I believe the lady asked you to leave, Elias said. Blackwood stared at him. He looked amused, not frightened. And who might you be? Another stray dog looking for a bone. I'm her legal counsel. Elias lied. The words came out smooth. He remembered the regulations. He remembered the loopholes. Army Regulation 14, Section B. The property of a serviceman listed as missing in action, not confirmed deserted, missing, cannot be seized by civil authority until a period of 5 years has passed or a body is produced. The room went silent. Blackwood's smile faded. He is a deserter. Has he been convicted by a court-martial? Elias asked, stepping into the room. Show me the papers. Show me the verdict. Until then, he is innocent until proven guilty. And this land is under the protection of the War Department. It was nonsense. Mostly. But it was bureaucratic nonsense, spoken with the authority of a man who knew how the machine worked. Blackwood studied Elias. He saw the military boots. The stance. He realized this wasn't just a drifter. You are interfering in municipal matters, Blackwood hissed. I'm protecting federal interests, Elias countered. Now. Get out. Balon took a step forward, growling. I'll break his jaw, Judge. Blackwood raised a hand. No, Barlon. Not today. He looked at Clara. This buys you time, Clara. A week. Maybe 2. But lawyers are expensive. And soldiers fade away. I will have this land. And I will have what is buried beneath it. He looked at Elias. You have made a mistake, stranger. Iron Ridge is a deep hole. Be careful you don't fall in. Blackwood swept out of the shack, Barlon trailing behind him like a kicked cur. The silence that followed was heavy. Clara released Leo. She looked at Elias. She didn't look relieved. She looked furious. Why? She demanded. Why did you do that? He was going to hurt you. He is going to hurt me anyway. Now he's just going to be angrier. She paced the small room, her hands in her hair. Legal counsel? Federal interests? You just painted a target on your back. I can handle Blackwood. You don't know him. He kills people, Mr. Thorne. He makes them disappear. She stopped pacing and looked at him. Who are you really? Why do you care? Elias looked at Leo. The boy was watching him with wide, dark eyes. There was no fear in the boy's eyes anymore. There was curiosity. I told you, Elias said softly. I'm looking for James. And I can't find him if you're in an orphanage or a grave. Clara slumped onto a chair. All the fight seemed to drain out of her instantly. She put her head in her hands. He's not coming back, she whispered. James isn't coming back. Where is he, Clara? Elias asked. He kept his voice gentle, but the hunter was there, waiting. I don't know, she sobbed. A dry, heaving sound. One night he went to meet Blackwood about the land. He never came home. The army says he stole the payroll and ran. The town says he abandoned us. But... She looked up, tears streaking the grime on her face. He wouldn't leave Leo. He loved that boy more than life. He wouldn't leave us. Elias looked at the woman. He looked at the mute boy. He felt the weight of the lie in his pocket. Target, James Reed. I believe you, Elias said. And for the first time since arriving in Iron Ridge, he wasn't lying. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch of the boarding house, whittling a piece of cedar. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle that veiled the world. He heard a noise in the barn. Elias moved. Instinct took over. He slid into the shadows, his knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He crept toward the barn. The smell of wet hay and horses filling his nose. He peered through the crack in the door. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't Barlon. It was Leo. The boy was sitting in the straw next to Elias's roan mare. He was stroking the horse's nose, his small hand moving in rhythmic circles. The horse, usually skittish with strangers, stood perfectly still, its head lowered, blowing soft breaths into the boy's hair. Leo wasn't carving. He was just being. Elias opened the door slowly. The hinges creaked. Leo jumped. He scrambled back, eyes wide, looking for an exit. Easy, Elias said, keeping his voice low. He held up his hands, showing they were empty. He had palmed the knife. I'm not going to hurt you. Leo pressed himself against the stall wall. He was trembling. Elias slowly sat down on a bale of hay. He didn't look at the boy. He looked at the horse. She likes apples, Elias said to the air. But she likes carrots better. And she hates thunder. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of cedar he had been working on. It was rough, just a shape, but it was starting to look like a horse's head. He placed the wood and his knife on the ground between them. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. I used to carve when I was scared, Elias said. In the war. Kept my hands busy. Kept my mind from running away. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10, then he heard the soft rustle of straw. Elias opened one eye. Leo had crawled forward. He picked up the knife. He tested the weight of it. It was a soldier's knife, sharp and deadly. The boy looked at Elias. Elias nodded. Leo picked up the wood. He didn't run away. He sat down, cross-legged, 5 feet from Elias. And he began to carve. The sound of the blade shaving wood was the only sound in the barn. Scrape. 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 It was a conversation without words. A truce. Elias watched the boy's hands. They were skilled. Precise. Better than Elias's own hands. Your father taught you, Elias stated. It wasn't a question. Leo stopped. He looked at the wood. He nodded once, sharp and quick. He was a good man? Elias asked. Leo nodded again. He didn't run away, did he? Leo shook his head violently. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't make a sound. His mouth opened, trying to form a scream, a word, something, but nothing came out. The silence choked him. He looked at Elias with a desperation that broke Elias's heart. Elias leaned forward. It's okay. You don't have to speak. The wood speaks for you. Leo wiped his eyes. He went back to carving. But the tension in his shoulders eased. Elias watched him. And in the dim light of the barn, the truth settled on Elias Thorne like a heavy stone. James Reed hadn't stolen the money. James Reed hadn't run. James Reed was dead. Blackwood had killed him. And this boy, this silent, broken boy, he knew. He had seen it. That's why he was mute. That's why Blackwood wanted the land, to bury the evidence, or perhaps because the body was already there, and Elias's mission, to silence the loose ends, suddenly shifted. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the shield. Elias looked at the boy, then at the knife in the boy's hand. Keep it, Elias said. A man needs a knife. Leo looked up, surprised. He clutched the knife to his chest. But keep it hidden, Elias added, his voice hardening. Because there are wolves in this town, Leo. And we're going to have to hunt them. Leo nodded. His eyes, usually so full of fear, held a new glint. A spark of steel. Outside, the rain intensified, turning the streets of Iron Ridge into a river of mud. But inside the barn, a pact had been made, the soldier and the witness, and neither of them had said a word about love, or justice, or redemption. But as Elias watched the boy carve, he knew one thing for certain: he would burn the whole world down before he let Blackwood touch this kid. The alliance in the barn was a quiet thing, forged in shadow and sealed with a knife. But daylight in Iron Ridge had a way of exposing even the smallest secrets. The morning after Elias gave Leo the knife, the atmosphere in the Reed shack shifted. It wasn't a thawing, exactly. It was more like the tension of a bowstring being pulled back, tight. Dangerous, but purposeful. Elias no longer hid in his room at the boarding house. He was down in the mud. He spent the morning repairing the corral fence that leaned drunkenly against the wind. He worked with his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked by the white, jagged lines of old skirmishes. Clara watched him from the porch. She was scrubbing clothes in a tin tub, the rhythmic shhh of fabric against the washboard acting as a metronome for the morning. She didn't thank him. She didn't offer him water. But she didn't tell him to leave, either. In the vocabulary of the desperate, that was an embrace. Leo sat on the porch steps, whittling. He was making a wolf now. He kept glancing up at Elias, studying the way the man moved, the way he handled the hammer, the way he favored his left leg. The boy was mimicking him, absorbing the movements of a protector. Around noon, Elias stopped. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and walked to the porch. Fence will hold for now, he said. But the posts are rotted at the base. Need new timber. Clara wrung out a shirt, twisting it until her knuckles turned white. We don't have money for timber, Mr. Thorne. And the lumberyard won't extend credit to the widow of a trader. I have timber, Elias said. Saw some scrap behind Margaret's place. She said I could take it if I cleared the brush. Clara looked up. Her eyes were the color of burnt coffee, dark and bitter. Why are you doing this? The Legal Counsel Act. I understand that. It's a game. But this? She gestured to the fence. Sweat isn't a game. Elias leaned against the porch post. He took out his tobacco pouch. Maybe I just like fixing things. Broken things bother me, or maybe you're fattening the calf before the slaughter. Clara said sharply. You're still looking for him. James. Elias paused. He lit his cigarette, the smoke curling blue in the damp air. I'm looking for the truth, Clara. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes not. And if you find him? Clara stood up, wiping her soapy hands on her apron. If you find out he's alive? What then? You turn him in for the reward? Elias looked at her. He saw the terror beneath the anger. He saw a woman who had spent 2 years holding up the sky so it wouldn't crush her children. If I find him, Elias said softly, I'll ask him why he left a woman like you behind. Clara flinched, as if he had slapped her. She turned away, grabbing the basket of wet laundry. Lunch is beans. If you want some, it's on the stove. If not, the saloon serves steak for $2. She went inside, the screen door slamming shut. Elias smoked his cigarette down to the filter. He looked at Leo. The boy held up the wooden wolf. It had bared teeth. Good. Elias nodded. Make it mean. The pressure from Blackwood wasn't subtle. It was a tightening noose. 2 days later, Elias walked into the general store to buy nails. The shopkeeper, a nervous man named Miller who sweated even in the winter, refused to serve him. Can't sell to you, stranger. Miller mumbled, wiping the counter nervously. I have money. Elias placed a silver coin on the wood. It ain't about money. It's about supply. I'm out of nails. Elias looked at the barrel behind Miller, brimming with iron nails. He looked back at Miller. Blackwood? Elias asked. Miller didn't answer. He just looked at the floor. Please. Just go. I got a family. Elias took the coin back. We all got families, Miller. Some of us just protect them better. He walked out. The town was isolating them. Blackwood was cutting off the blood supply. No food. No supplies. No work. He wanted to starve Clara out. Elias returned to the boarding house. Margaret was in the parlor, drinking tea that smelled suspiciously like brandy. You're making a mess of my town, soldier, she said without looking up from her book. Your town is already a mess, Margaret. I'm just turning over the rocks. Blackwood stopped by today, Margaret said. She closed the book. Her face was grim. He reminded me that my license to operate this house is up for renewal next month. He suggested that harboring vagrants might reflect poorly on my application. You want me to leave? Margaret looked at him. Her eyes were old, rimmed with red but sharp. I want you to tell me why you care. You're a mercenary, aren't you? A bounty hunter, scout. Elias corrected. Same thing. You sell death. So why are you playing handyman for Clara Reed? Elias sat down opposite her. The chair groaned. Because she reminds me of someone you loved, someone I failed. Margaret poured a splash of brandy into her tea. Her hand shook slightly. We all have ghosts in Iron Ridge, Elias. Even me, especially you. Elias countered. You know him, don't you? Blackwood. Margaret laughed. A harsh sound. I know him better than his own mother did. I introduced him to his wife. My daughter. Elias went still. Your daughter, Alice? Margaret's face softened, the lines of age momentarily smoothed by grief. She died 5 years ago. Childbirth. The baby didn't make it either. Cyrus. He changed after that. Or maybe he didn't change. Maybe the mask just fell off. She took a long sip of tea. He loved Alice. In his own twisted, possessive way. When she died, he decided he hated God. And since he couldn't punish God, he decided to punish everyone else. He wants control, Elias. Absolute, suffocating control. Because he couldn't control death, he's killing this town. Elias said. And he's killing Clara. He wants the land. Margaret whispered. It's not just spite. There's something under that miserable patch of dirt. James Reed found it. That's why he died. Elias leaned forward. You know James is dead, I suspect, Margaret said. James was a good man. But he was naive. He came to me a week before he disappeared. He was excited. Said he found the vein of the century. He wanted to partner with Cyrus to mine it properly, and then he vanished, and then he vanished. Margaret nodded. And Cyrus suddenly produced a ledger claiming James had stolen payroll. Convenient. She looked at Elias. You're the only one who has stood up to him in 2 years. Everyone else is bought or broken. I'm an old woman, Elias. I'm tired of being afraid. If you're going to fight him dirty. Because that's how he fights. Elias stood up. I need nails. And timber. And food. Margaret reached into her bodice and pulled out a key. The shed out back. Take what you need. And the root cellar. Take the potatoes. But do it at night. I can't be seen helping you. Not yet, thank you, don't thank me. Margaret hissed. Just hurt him. Hurt him for Alice. The storm hit 3 nights later. It came off the mountains like a physical blow, a wall of wind and freezing rain that screamed through the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the air pressure dropped so fast it made ears pop. Elias was in his room when the first window pane in the boarding house shattered. He looked out. The world was a blur of horizontal water. But through the gray chaos he saw the shack. The roof was peeling back. A sheet of tin, loose and rusted, was flapping violently like the wing of a dying bird. Elias didn't think. He grabbed his coat, his hammer, and a coil of rope. He ran. The wind nearly knocked him over as he stepped onto the street. The mud was ankle-deep, sucking at his boots. He sprinted toward the shack, head down, fighting the gale. When he reached the door, he didn't knock. He shoved it open. Inside was chaos. Water was pouring in through a gap in the ceiling. The wind was howling through the room, extinguishing the lantern, sending shadows dancing wildly. Clara was standing on the table, trying to hold a piece of canvas against the leak. She was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, screaming something lost to the wind. Leo was in the corner, huddled under a blanket, clutching his wooden wolf. Get down! Elias roared, his voice cutting through the noise. Clara turned, startled. The roof! It's going, I know! Get down! Get the boy! Elias dropped his tools. He grabbed the heavy oak table and flipped it onto its side, creating a barricade in the driest corner of the room. Get behind it! He ordered. Clara grabbed Leo and dragged him behind the table. Elias looked up. The main beam of the roof was groaning. It was cracked. If the wind shifted, the whole structure would collapse. I have to go up, Elias shouted. No! Clara grabbed his arm. Her grip was iron. It's suicide. You'll be blown off. If I don't secure that tin, the wind gets under it and takes the whole roof. Stay here. He pulled away from her and ran back out into the storm. The wind hit him like a hammer. He scrambled up the side of the shack, using the woodpile as a ladder. The roof was slick, treacherous. He clawed his way up, the tin cutting his hands. He reached the loose sheet. It was thrashing violently. He threw his body onto it, pinning it down with his weight. The metal vibrated beneath him, alive with the storm's energy. He pulled a nail from his pocket with his teeth. He found the hammer. Bang! The wind swallowed the sound. Bang! He drove the nail deep. He crawled to the next corner. Bang! Rain blinded him. Cold seeped into his marrow. His bad leg was screaming in agony. But he didn't stop. He hammered until his arm was numb. He hammered until the roof stopped fighting him. He lay there for a moment, gasping, face pressed against the cold, wet metal. He was alive. He slid down the roof and fell into the mud. He crawled back inside the shack. The water had stopped pouring in. The wind still howled, but the roof held. Elias collapsed against the wall, shivering uncontrollably. Clara was there instantly. She had a towel. She had a blanket. You idiot! She whispered, her voice trembling. You damn fool! She dried his face. Her hands were gentle, frantic. She stripped off his soaked duster. Then his shirt. She stopped. The lantern had been relit, casting a dim, golden glow. In that light, Clara saw his back. It was a map of pain. Thick, keloid scars crisscrossed his skin. Burn marks. Lash marks. The distinct, puckered star of a bullet wound near his shoulder blade. And lower, the jagged lines of shrapnel. It wasn't just a soldier's body. It was a prisoner's body. Clara reached out. Her fingers hovered over the scars, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Who did this to you?" she asked. The anger was gone. Only sorrow remained. Elias leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closed. "The war. And, afterwards. When I was captured, you were a prisoner? For 6 months. Andersonville." The name hung in the air like a curse. "They wanted information. I didn't have it. But they kept asking." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "That's why I'm good at finding people, Clara. Because I know what it's like to be lost." Clara sat back on her heels. She was shivering too, her dress clinging to her frame. "I have scars too," she said quietly. "They just don't show." She touched her throat. The faint yellow bruise from Barlin's grip was fading. But the memory wasn't. "Tell me," Elias said. "Tell me the truth. About James." The storm raged outside, enclosing them in a bubble of intimate silence. The fire in the stove crackled, fighting the dampness. Clara looked at Leo, who was asleep behind the table, exhausted by fear. "He didn't steal the payroll," she said. Her voice was steady now. "James was a proud man. Too proud. He found silver. A vein running right under the creek bed. He showed Blackwood. He trusted the law." She picked up a piece of dry wood and tossed it into the stove. "Blackwood told him the land rights were complicated. Said they needed to file a claim in Helena. They rode out together. 2 days later, Blackwood came back alone. Said James had confessed to stealing army gold and fled to Mexico to avoid court-martial. Said James asked Blackwood to look after me." She laughed bitterly. "I knew it was a lie. James wouldn't leave his boots behind. His favorite boots. They were still by the door. You think Blackwood killed him? I know he did." Clara turned to Elias. Her eyes were fierce, burning with unshed tears. "I think he buried him in the old mine shaft. And I think he's waiting for me to give up, or die, so he can dig up the silver without a witness." Elias reached out. He took her hand. Her skin was rough, calloused, freezing cold. His hand was warm, scarred, trembling. "He won't get the land," Elias promised. "And he won't get you." Clara looked at their joined hands. She didn't pull away. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you stay? You could leave. You could ride away tonight and never look back." Elias looked at her mouth. Then her eyes. The distance between them was measured in inches and lifetimes. "Braves don't walk, Clara," he said, echoing her words from days ago. "But men do. And I'm tired of walking alone." He didn't kiss her. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was heavier than a kiss. It was an anchoring. He squeezed her hand, then let go. He stood up, groaning as his leg protested. "I'll take the first watch," he said, moving to the window with his rifle. "Sleep. The roof will hold." Clara watched him. For the first time in 2 years, she closed her eyes and slept without a knife under her pillow. The storm passed, leaving the world washed out and pale. But the peace didn't last. 3 nights later, Elias woke to the smell of smoke, not wood smoke. This was acrid. Oil and tar. He sat up in bed, grabbing his gun. The room was flickering with an orange glow. "Fire!" The scream came from the street. Elias ran to the window. The stable behind the boarding house, Margaret's stable, was an inferno. Flames licked up the wooden sides, reaching for the hayloft. The horses were screaming, a high-pitched, terrifying sound. Elias didn't bother with his boots. He ran barefoot down the stairs, bursting out the back door. Margaret was already there. She was in her nightgown, hair wild, trying to open the stable doors. The heat was intense, pushing her back. "The horses!" she screamed. "My horses!" Elias grabbed a bucket of water from the trough and threw it over himself. He took a deep breath and ran into the burning stable. The smoke was a physical wall. He couldn't see. He followed the sound of the panic. He found the stalls. He kicked the latches open. Go! Move! He slapped the flanks of the terrified animals. One horse bolted. Then another. They thundered past him, knocking him into the burning wall. He felt the skin on his arms sear. He stumbled out, coughing, dragging the last horse by its halter. He collapsed on the wet grass, gasping for air. The stable was gone. It collapsed inward with a roar of sparks. Margaret stood watching it, her face illuminated by the destruction. She wasn't crying. She was shaking with a rage that looked colder than ice. Clara and Leo came running from their shack. Clara fell to her knees beside Elias, checking him for burns. I'm fine, Elias rasped, pushing her hands away gently. I'm fine. He looked at Margaret. He did this, Elias said. Margaret turned to him. Her eyes were voids. He sent a message. Renewals denied. She looked at the burning wreckage of her livelihood. He thinks fire scares me, Margaret whispered. He forgot that I was born in hell. She looked at Elias, then at Clara. The time for defense is over, Margaret said. Elias. You wanted to hurt him, yes, then we stop playing by the rules. He wants a war? We give him a massacre. Clara pulled Leo close. How? He has the law. He has the guns. We have the truth, Margaret said. She looked at Elias. And we have a ghost. Elias stood up. The pain in his arm was sharp. Grounding. We need the ledger, Elias said. Or whatever proof James had. Blackwood killed him for a reason. James must have had proof of the silver or something worse. We don't know where it is, Clara said helplessly. I tore this house apart looking for it. James hid it too well. Leo tugged on Elias's wet shirt. Elias looked down. The boy's face was pale, illuminated by the firelight. He wasn't looking at the fire. He was looking at Elias. He pointed to the shack. Then he pointed to his chest. No, not his chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden wolf he had carved. He held it up. Then he reached into his other pocket. He pulled out the wooden falcon. The one he carried everywhere. The one his father had carved for him. Leo held the falcon out to Elias. His hands were trembling. What is it, Leo? Elias asked, kneeling down. Leo pressed a hidden latch on the bird's belly. It was seamless, almost invisible. Click! The bird's head tilted back. The body was hollow. Inside, tightly rolled like a scroll, was a sheaf of thin, onion-skin papers. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Clara gasped. James, he gave that to Leo the day he left. Elias carefully extracted the papers. He unrolled them in the light of the burning stable. It wasn't just a claim for a silver mine. It was a diary. October 14, 1876. White River. We were ordered to fire. They were unarmed. Women. Children. Colonel Blackwood gave the order. He said no witnesses. God forgive us. I kept the records. I have the names. I have the coordinates of the mass grave. Elias read the words. His blood ran cold. James Reed hadn't just found silver. He had found leverage. Blackwood hadn't been a judge back then. He had been a colonel. A colonel who had massacred a village to cover up a tactical blunder, and then reinvented himself as a respectable pillar of society. This wasn't just theft. This was a war crime. He didn't die for silver, Elias whispered. He died because he had a conscience. He looked at Leo. The boy was crying silently, tears tracking through the soot on his face. He had been carrying the weight of his father's death, and his father's truth, in his pocket for 2 years. Silence wasn't his disability. It was his fortress. Elias closed his hand over the papers. He looked at Clara, then Margaret. The fire roared behind them, casting long, dancing shadows. This ends tonight, Elias said. He checked his revolver. 5 rounds. Margaret, send a telegram to the federal marshal in Helena. Use the emergency code. Tell them you have proof of the White River massacre. The telegraph office is watched. Margaret said. I'll clear a path. Elias said. He turned to Clara. Take Leo. Go to the old mine shaft. Hide. Don't come out until I come for you. Where are you going? Clara asked, gripping his arm. Elias looked toward the mansion on the hill, where the lights of Judge Blackwood's estate burned arrogant and bright against the darkness. I'm going to take a confession, Elias said. And I'm going to deliver a judgment. He walked away from the light of the fire, disappearing into the shadows of Iron Ridge. He moved differently now. The limp was gone. The hesitation was gone. The hunter had returned. The road to the Blackwood estate was a serpent of mud winding up the hill, but Elias didn't take the road. He moved through the timberline, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness of the trees. He reached the perimeter of the estate. It was quiet. Too quiet. There were no guards at the gate. The windows of the mansion were dark, save for a single lamp burning in the study. Elias crouched by the iron fence, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on his hat brim. His instincts, honed by years of hunting men who didn't want to be found, were screaming. Wrong. He vaulted the fence. He sprinted across the lawn, ignoring the pain in his bad leg. He kicked open the front door. Blackwood! Elias roared, his revolver raised. Silence answered him. He moved room to room. Empty. The furniture was covered in dust sheets. The fireplace was cold. He reached the study. The lamp was indeed burning. On the heavy mahogany desk, a single piece of paper was weighted down by a crystal decanter. Elias picked it up. It was a map. A crude sketch of the valley. A red circle was drawn around a specific location, the old silver mine, and written beneath it, in elegant, flowing script, I know where the bodies are buried, Mr. Thorne. Do you? Elias crushed the paper in his fist. He had made a mistake. A fatal, tactical error. He had sent Clara and Leo to the mine to hide. He thought it was a sanctuary. He didn't realize it was a trap. Blackwood hadn't come to the mansion to defend his empire. He had gone to the mine to destroy the evidence. And the evidence wasn't just the silver. It was the family. Damn you! Elias whispered. He turned and ran back into the night. He didn't take his horse. The terrain was too rough, too steep. He ran on foot, pushing his body past the point of exhaustion, fueled by a terror he hadn't felt since White River. The old mine sat like a gaping wound in the side of the mountain, a mile north of the town. The entrance was boarded up, rotting timbers crossing like skeletal fingers over the dark mouth of the earth. Clara huddled in the small alcove near the entrance, pulling Leo tight against her chest. The rain here was colder, mixed with sleet. He's coming. Leo signed, his hands moving frantically in the dark. Elias is coming. Clara whispered, stroking his wet hair. He promised, no. Leo shook his head violently. He pointed into the darkness of the tunnel. Him. The bad man. Clara froze. She heard it then. Not the wind. Not the rain. Footsteps. Inside the mine, the boards covering the entrance groaned. Then, with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, they were kicked outward. Clara scrambled back, dragging Leo with her, but they were backed against a sheer rock face. A lantern swung in the darkness. Judge Blackwood stepped out of the mine. He wasn't wearing his fine frock coat. He wore a heavy oilskin duster, and in his hand, he didn't hold a cane. He held a Winchester repeating rifle. Baron stood beside him, a bandage wrapped around his ear where Elias had shot him. His face twisted in a grin of anticipation. I told you, Clara, Blackwood said, his voice echoing off the rocks. Iron Ridge is a deep hole. And you just crawled to the bottom of it. Where is Elias? Clara demanded, standing up to shield her son. If you hurt him, Mr. Thorne is chasing ghosts at my estate. Blackwood smiled thinly. He is a predictable man. Soldiers always attack the castle. They forget about the graveyard. He gestured to the mine entrance. This is where James died, you know. Right here. He refused to sign the deed. He said he had a duty to the truth. Blackwood shook his head. Poor James. He didn't understand that truth is a luxury of the living. The dead have no use for it. He raised the rifle. Give me the boy, Clara. No. He has the diary. I know he does. I saw the way he guarded that wooden bird. Give me the diary, and I might make this quick. You'll have to kill me first. I intend to. Blackwood said. He cocked the rifle. Barlon. Get the boy. Barlon stepped forward, drawing his bowie knife. Clara screamed. She grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it. It struck Barlon in the shoulder, but he didn't stop. He lunged, grabbing Clara by the hair and throwing her into the mud. Mom! Leo's mouth opened, a silent scream tearing at his throat. Barlon loomed over Clara, raising the knife. Crack! A gunshot tore through the night. Barlon's head snapped back. He crumpled to the ground, a neat hole in his forehead. Blackwood spun around, raising his rifle toward the tree-line. Elias Thorne walked out of the mist. He was limping heavily, his chest heaving, mud covering him from head to toe. He held his Colt Navy steady in one hand. Step away from them, Cyrus, Elias rasped. Blackwood fired. The bullet struck Elias in the left shoulder, spinning him around. Elias grunted, falling to one knee. He fired back, but the shot went wide, sparking off the rock wall. Elias! Clara screamed. Blackwood laughed. He worked the lever of his Winchester. Click-clack. You're too late, hero. You're bleeding out. And I have the high ground. Elias struggled to stand. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. Blood was soaking his coat. He tried to raise the revolver, but his hand was shaking uncontrollably. The tremors. The damn tremors. You can't bury this, Elias said, his voice weak. The marshal is coming. Margaret sent the wire. Margaret is an old drunk. Blackwood sneered. And by the time the marshal gets here, you'll be just another tragic accident in a dangerous mine. A drifter who murdered a widow and her son, then turned the gun on himself. He aimed the rifle at Elias's chest. Goodbye, Sergeant. Time seemed to slow down. Elias looked at the black bore of the rifle. He looked at Clara, who was crawling toward him through the mud. He looked at Leo. The boy was standing near the mine entrance. He wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking at the ground. Where Barlon's body lay, where Barlon's gun lay. It was a heavy revolver, a peacemaker. Too big for a child's hand. Leo looked at the gun. Then he looked at Blackwood. Elias saw the change in the boy's eyes. It wasn't the steel of a soldier. It was something older. It was the fury of a son who had watched his father die and refused to watch it happen again. Leo, no. Elias whispered. Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger. Leo dived. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy revolver with both hands, rolling in the mud, bringing the weapon up. Blackwood saw the movement. He turned, surprised. You little rat. He swung the rifle toward the boy. Leo didn't just pull the trigger. He squeezed it with everything he had. Boom! The recoil threw the boy backward into the dirt. The bullet hit Blackwood in the knee. The judge screamed, a high, undignified sound that shattered his composure forever. His leg buckled. He collapsed, clutching his shattered kneecap, the rifle falling into the mud. Silence rushed back into the clearing, heavier than before. Leo lay on his back, gasping. He sat up slowly. He looked at the smoking gun in his hand. He looked at the man writhing on the ground, and then the dam broke. Leave him alone! The voice was raw, gravelly, and used. It tore from Leo's throat like a physical thing. It wasn't a child's voice. It was a roar. Clara scrambled to him, pulling him into her arms, sobbing. Leo! Oh God, Leo! Elias forced himself to stand. He stumbled over to Blackwood. The judge was pale, his face gray with shock. He looked up at Elias with terrified eyes. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a small, broken man in the mud. Help me! Blackwood gasped. I'm a judge. You can't let me die. Elias looked down at him. He aimed his Colt at Blackwood's head. The rage was there. The desire to end it. To put a bullet in this monster and finish the job the war had started. Do it, Blackwood whispered. Make yourself a murderer. Prove me right. Elias's finger tightened. Then he felt a hand on his good arm. It was Clara. She wasn't looking at Blackwood. She was looking at Elias. Her eyes were clear, fierce, and pleading. Don't, she said softly. Not for him. For Leo. Don't let my son see another murder. Elias looked at the boy. Leo was watching, his chest heaving, tears streaming down his face. He had saved Elias. If Elias killed Blackwood now, he would stain that act of courage with execution. Elias exhaled. He lowered the gun. You're not worth the bullet, Cyrus, Elias said. He turned to the darkness of the trail. Margaret! You can come out now! From the shadows of the tree-line, a horse emerged. Margaret sat in the saddle, holding a lantern. Behind her rode 3 men in dusters with silver stars pinned to their chests. The federal marshals. Margaret looked down at Blackwood. Her face was impassive. I didn't send a telegram, Cyrus, she said, her voice cutting through the rain. I sent a rider 3 days ago. When you threatened to burn my home. I knew you were coming to the end of your rope. One of the marshals dismounted. He walked over to Blackwood, pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and shackled the judge's hands behind his back. Cyrus Blackwood, the marshal said. You are under arrest for the murder of James Reed, the theft of military property, and treason against the United States. Elias handed the marshal the onionskin papers, the diary. Here's the rest of it, Elias said, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. White River. He gave the order. The marshal looked at the papers, then at Elias. And who are you, soldier? Just a witness, Elias said. Just a ghost. He looked at Clara. She was holding Leo, rocking him. They were safe. Elias's legs finally gave out. He sat down heavily on a rock, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the cold and the pain. Margaret dismounted and walked over to him. She handed him a flask. Drink, she ordered. It's the good stuff. Elias took a long pull. It burned like fire, but it dulled the edge of the bullet wound. You're a crazy old woman, Elias muttered. And you're a terrible carpenter, Margaret retorted, nodding at his shoulder. But you'll do. The sun that rose over Iron Ridge the next morning was different. It wasn't the pale, sickly light of the past weeks. It was crisp, gold, and sharp. The town was buzzing. The arrest of Judge Blackwood was a storm that would shake the territory for years. The mine was sealed off as a crime scene. James Reed's body would be recovered, given a proper burial, and his name cleared. But at the edge of town, by the broken fence of the Reed shack, it was quiet. Elias stood by his horse. His left arm was in a sling, bandaged tightly by the town doctor. His saddlebags were packed. Clara stood on the porch. She wore a clean dress, the blue one. Her hair was tied back. She looked tired. But the haunted look, the look of a prey animal, was gone. Leo sat on the railing. He was whittling again. You don't have to go, Clara said. She didn't cross the yard. She stayed on the porch, hugging her arms. The marshal said you're a material witness. You have immunity. I have orders. Elias lied. I have to report back to the fort. Deliver the final statement. You're running, Clara said. I'm moving, Elias corrected. That's what I do. He walked over to Leo. The boy stopped carving. He looked up. You found your voice, Elias said quietly. Yes, Leo whispered. The word was rusty, but it was there. Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out his own carving knife, the one he had carried through the war. The handle was worn smooth by worry and time. He held it out handle first. Trade? Elias asked. Leo looked at the knife. Then he looked at the wooden wolf in his hand. It was rough, ugly, and perfect. Leo handed Elias the wolf. He took the knife. Sharp edges, Elias warned. I know, Leo said. Elias turned to Clara. He walked up the steps until he was standing in front of her. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to stay and fix the fence properly. He wanted to sit on this porch and watch the boy grow up. But he was a man with blood on his hands and ghosts in his head. He needed to bury them before he could build anything new. James was a good man, Elias said. He loved you. I know, Clara said. Tears welled in her eyes. You're a good man too, Elias. Elias shook his head. Not yet. But I'm working on it. He touched the brim of his hat. If the fence leans again. Elias started. I'll fix it myself. Clara smiled through her tears. Or I'll wait, for the carpenter to come back. Elias held her gaze. The promise hung between them, unspoken but solid as the mountains. Keep the gun oiled, he said. Ride safe, soldier. Elias mounted his horse. He turned the roan mare toward the south road. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he would never leave. He rode out of Iron Ridge as the sun climbed higher. He rode past the burnt remains of the stable. Past the jailhouse where Blackwood sat in a cell. Past the saloon where the piano was playing a cheerful tune. He reached the crest of the hill and paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden wolf. He ran his thumb over the jagged ears. It was crude. It was wild. It was beautiful. Elias Thorne smiled. He wasn't a hunter anymore. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a man on a long road home. And for the first time in 5 years, the silence inside him didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. Epilogue. 1 year later, the winter had been hard, but the spring came with a vengeance of wildflowers. Clara Reed sat on her porch, shelling peas. The fence was straight now, reinforced with new cedar posts. The roof was tin, shining in the sun. Leo was in the yard, teaching a younger boy how to hold a carving knife. Gentle, Leo said, his voice strong and clear. You have to listen to the wood. A rider appeared on the horizon. Clara didn't look up immediately. Riders passed through all the time, but then the dog barked. A happy bark. Leo stood up. He shaded his eyes against the sun. The rider moved slowly. The horse was a roan mare, gray around the muzzle. The man in the saddle sat tall, though he favored his left shoulder. He stopped at the gate. He didn't get down immediately. He just sat there, looking at the house, at the woman, at the boy. He took off his hat. His hair was longer, touched with gray at the temples. Clara stood up. The bowl of peas spilled onto the floor, green pearls scattering across the wood. She didn't care. She walked down the steps. She walked across the yard. She opened the gate. Elias Thorne smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. Fence looks good, he said. It needed work, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. It was waiting. I'm done running, Clara, then come inside, she said, reaching up to take the reins. Coffee is hot. Elias dismounted. He walked with a limp, but he walked steady. He was home.